Joining us now, former U.S. Attorney and MSNBC legal analyst Chuck Rosenberg, senior correspondent at Vox Ian Millhiser, and non-resident fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and senior director of international economics during the Biden administration, Peter Harrell. All right, Chuck, were they skeptical?
They seemed skeptical. I'm not surprised because what the government was asking for here was broad. They were asking for authority, essentially, to levy taxes. As Justice Kavanaugh said today, the Supreme Court needs to figure out what it means to regulate imports. According to the president and his legal team, that would mean that would include, I should say, Katie, the imposition of tariffs. According to the challengers, that authority, essentially to tax, is reserved exclusively to the Congress.
So they did sound skeptical in places, certainly. I wonder what your expectation is for when they might rule on this, because usually we get these rulings in June, but this is something that Americans are dealing with every single day.
So I'd like to say this is an educated guess, but I'm not all that educated, so it's just a guess. But the Supreme Court, at the government's request, did fast-track this argument, Katie. And so it makes sense to me that they would probably try and fast-track an opinion. Normally, when they hear cases in October and November and December, we can expect a decision, next June. I imagine it would be quicker than that.
Let me play Neil Gorsuch questioning Inspector General Sauer today. Solicitor General Sauer. This is soundbite number one.
I want to explain to me how you draw the line, because you say we shouldn't be concerned because this is foreign affairs and the president has inherent authority, and so delegation off the books, more or less. And if that's true, what would prohibit Congress from just abdicating all responsibility to regulate foreign commerce, for that matter, declare war, to the president?
We don't contend that he could do that. If it did.
Why not? What's the reason to accept the notion that Congress can hand off the power to declare war to the president?
Well, we don't contend that. Again, that would be...
you do. You say it's unreviewable. There's no manageable standard, nothing to be done. And now I think tell me if I'm wrong. You backed off that position.
Maybe that's fair to say.
Okay, all right.
That would be, an abdication. That would really be an abdication, not a delegation.
I'm delighted to hear that,
Ian, this was such an interesting moment because that ability to declare war is a congressional power. The presidents try to get around it all the time. There's reporting the president might be trying to get around it right now to take matters into his own hands in Venezuela. That's from the New York Times. Right. But explain exactly what Justice Gorsuch was trying to get at, and explain the significance of Sauer changing his argument midstream.
Yeah. So there's a lot of, political history underlying that statement by Justice Gorsuch. So I've covered the Federalist Society, which is kind of the lawyers' wing of the Republican Party for more than a decade now. And beginning in the Obama administration, they were very concerned about President Obama and later President Biden making aggressive assertions of executive power. And the Federalist Society started to come up with new theories for how you could rein in presidential power. The one that they eventually settled on is this thing called the Major Questions Doctrine, which is the idea that when a president does something that's too ambitious, it has too much of an impact on our economy or too much political impact, that's not allowed. It doesn't matter if there's an existing statute that allows them to do it. They got to go back and they got to get a new law. And one question going into this oral argument was, now that we have a Republican president, would the justices actually follow this Major Questions Doctrine that they came up with to stop presidents like Biden and Obama, or would they give Trump an exemption to it? And Gorsuch, at least, seems to feel that the Major Questions Doctrine does apply to Donald Trump. Chief Justice Roberts, also asked some questions suggesting that he believed that it also applies to Republican presidents. Not all of the Republican justices were there. I think that Thomas and Kavanaugh and Alito are probably going to vote with Trump in this case. But it looks like, at least amongst the Republican justices, they seem to be evenly split on whether or not this doctrine should apply to presidents of both parties.
So, Peter, you were in the room. You saw this happening, not just with voices, but with faces. Tell me what it sounded like to you inside the courtroom.
Well, it was a very tough morning for Solicitor General Sauer. I thought you had skepticism of the government's position from across the board and across the ideological spectrum. Now, there were clear differences. You could see that, Justice Alito, possibly Justice Thomas were trying to maybe get to yes for how this 1977 emergency powers statute might authorize some tariffs, but even they, I think, had some questions about whether it would really authorize the kind of unbounded tariffs that Trump has in fact imposed. And I also thought it was interesting to see some of the Republicans justices, some of the conservative justices think quite directly and ask quite directly about what this could mean in the future. So there was a question that was asked of Solicitor General Sauer, well, could a future president declare a climate emergency and tariff car companies out of existence? And he basically said, well, we think climate change is a hoax, but kind of conceded that on the government's argument, a future president could do that. And you could see that kind of sinking in with a couple of the Republican justices.
Yeah, the implications for what expanding these powers could mean in the future. I thought that was an interesting argument that was made. I also wonder, we don't have time to get into this because it's going to be very complicated, if they do rule in favor of or not in favor of the president and his tariff emergency authority, how they roll it back and how people potentially get refunds. But that'll save for another day. Chuck and Ian and Peter, gentlemen, thank you so much.